Ready. Three.
Hi, folks. This is Kathy O'Toole calling. I'm going to be the instructor today. Can someone just confirm they can hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Thank you.
Hey, Kathy, just to mention, we were wondering if there was actually going to be a class because the schedule was showing like the next 3 classes on vacation or something like that.
Oh, really? I thought that your vacation didn't start till next week. I thought I saw something that said that it wasn't happening right away.
Yeah, it's supposed to be
Oh,
next
sorry,
week.
325 through 41. Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. No worries. Yeah. I mean, I would love not to have to do this tonight, but I'm pretty sure.
Hey, Kathy, what is a class not scheduled for next week? Why is the
Because
reason that?
I think they considered it spring break. They were just, I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's high
That's
school
my
spring
only
break.
thought.
Well,
Or
for
maybe
us,
perhaps.
for
Yeah,
us,
spring break for you
is
guys,
this
you know?
week. Yeah, no, spring break for us is this week. So we're like going places with our kids and stuff. And we were wondering, Angela and I, if we were allowed to just listen to the recordings of these next week, since that's not spring break for us. Like we're having to, yeah, our spring break, our kids are off this week.
Oh, yeah.
I sent an email
I
to
don't know. I
Brian,
don't
but I
know.
didn't.
And you can't even ask because Brian is on vacation now himself, so he doesn't come back until April 1st. And he's the
right.
one who coordinates all of the schedule for each.
Yeah, I think he said you could miss up to 3 days. Calling.
Yeah, but if an emergency happens, I don't want to have used these up.
Yeah.
I mean, now I'm having to
I
take my
agree.
phone with me for 2 hours at Universal. So,
Oh yeah. Oh wow. Oh yeah.
I'm
That's a
yeah,
so
bummer.
sorry.
we're going to the beach. We're going to the beach Wednesday. We're gonna have to have our phone with us.
Goodness. Yeah, not
Well, at
fun.
least you guys are lucky. You have live-in study partner.
Yeah, that's true, I guess. Yeah.
The benefit.
So one other thing I wanted to mention from last Wednesday, I did not forget about you all and that question that someone posed about why can't you get the material that you have to when you click on those PMBOK definitions for it to take you to that link and open it up so you can see the definition. And nobody that is here in Brian's absence has responded with what we can do in, for you to get that information. So I got to go back because honestly, I was out sick last Thursday and Friday. And so I haven't had a chance to see if there's somewhere else where that information is kept that we could provide that to you. So because I think it's not right that if your materials aren't allowing you to see the display of that definition, then how will you get that information? Because when we're doing it in this class, you'll probably have to replay the recording 3 times to get them all, right? So I'm still looking into it is the bottom line. But I didn't want you to think I forgot because I did write it down, but then I got sick and I didn't have time to deal with it before this morning or this afternoon.
I have a suggestion what I'm doing to capture them. So I don't have to re-listen to it is I'm just doing like screenshots when you pop them open.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
pasting them into a Word
Yeah,
document.
that's what I do that too. And I put it in OneNote.
Or yeah,
Okay.
you can do whatever.
Yeah. No, those are good ideas. So, okay. But, it just seems to me that if you're paying for this class, you should have the material without having to do all that extra work,
Agreed.
So anyways, okay. Well, hopefully tonight's topics are a little less challenging than they were on Wednesday. And we'll be able to maybe get out a little bit early so those of you on spring break can really have one. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and let me get to this. Okay. right. So why doesn't it want to start? Okay. There we go. Okay, so we have two topics tonight. The first one is on resources, and then the second one is on the budget. And so first we're going to talk about the resources. And from a project management perspective, resources primarily involve people and equipment. And the value and empower internal human resources and leverage external sources to ensure you have the best team and equipment possible. So our first item is the resource management plan. And a resource management plan, again, because we see this little symbol here, is primarily used in predictive methodology, so the waterfall method. And in this, a resource management plan is a component of your overall project plan, and it is going to capture these different bullets here. So it's used to identify your resources, again, both people and equipment. Your plan should say how you're going to acquire your resources. It also will define people's roles and responsibilities. So this one I can't express as being very important, is to at least know what the role is for every function that you need for the project, and then make sure that you have a person assigned to it. That's really important to have that written down. Authority, also, what do each of the roles have rights to using resources, making decisions, and accepting deliverables? The responsibility for that role, and then what are the competencies and skills required for that role? You might want to also look to your company's project organization chart so that you can see with your resources that you're going to be using and how they have their relationship in the reporting within your organization. Then we have a project team resource management, which is defines how you're going to select, manage, and then let go of resources when the project is completed. Also, if you need training for your resources, there's going to be a strategy documented for that in your resource management plan. You would document what the team development methods are, and then also if there's resource controls, and this is primarily on methods for how you ensure that the equipment type resources are available when you need them, and how you're going to control that. And then another good component of a resource management plan is just to state how you're going to recognize or incentivize your people on the team. So over here is the PMBOK definition, and they define a resource management plan as the component of the project management plan that describes how project resources are acquired, allocated, monitored, and controlled. Okay, so assigning the resources and allocating the responsibilities. When you assign your team members to the project, you have to decide what their skills are so that you can determine what roles and responsibilities they will have for the project. It's probably very helpful to create a team directory so you have a list of all of your team members as well as what their contact information is. And it may be helpful to you as well to use the org chart with creating the team directory so you know who they whose team they come from, if you will, and then creating the schedule. So it says here in the center that project schedules, resource assignments, and budgets are all interrelated, and all of them can be created at the same time. So that's pretty true, because since when we talked last week about the schedule and how we needed to know who the resources were and how long they were going to be available, and how much time we needed them for, that all was interrelated. So you can see how that would be. It makes sense to do it all at the same time. And then you want to, again, like I just said, tailor the responsibilities according to the team, the needs, and the project approach. And when you're looking for your resources, you should consider both the technical and the soft skills. Experience, knowledge are really helpful, as well as if there's any global or regional factors to consider because of where everybody is located across time zones. So now it says that to use a resource calendar, which this will be helpful in documenting the resource availability during a planned activity period. And this will be applied to both your people and your equipment. So whatever your project requires, you're going to want to know when those resources are available in relation to the time for your project. There are some calendars that it's important to look at where your resources are so that you can estimate project activities and also know what your dependencies are, specifies when and for how long the identified team and physical resources will be available, and also progressively elaborate and update it throughout the project. And then it says here that resource calendars can be used in any kind of project, be it predictive or an agile. Okay, so the PMBOK definition says that a resource calendar is one that identifies the working days and shifts for which each specific resource is available. Okay. One of the tools for assigning responsibility is something called a RACI chart or a responsibility assignment matrix. And these designate the types of accountabilities that have been assigned to your resources. And this also, the RACI chart helps to keep information visible. So the acronym RACI actually stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consult, and Inform. And so in the area of responsible, you're looking to each of your team members to make sure that they're responsible for work that they are going to complete for the task or create the deliverable. And it's important to note that every task should have at least one responsible person. Otherwise, why would you have the task? Then accountable, and this they put in parentheses is more on the team, the leadership team. So you have to delegate as a project manager. You have to delegate and review the work involved in the project. Make sure that the responsible person knows what the project expectations are and completes their work on time. And then you do want to make sure that each task has only one accountable person. That way, there's no confusion as to who's on point for making sure that that task or activity got completed. Then from a consult perspective, you look at your stakeholders and you use them to provide input and feedback on your project. And not every task or milestone wouldn't require a consulted party. they put a note here that says consider all stakeholders, but you only invite those that are necessary, that are going to give you the input you need. When you're developing your project schedule and your resource assignment. And then finally, we have inform, and this is for all those involved in the project, but they need to be informed of the project progress because their work might be affected, but they don't really need all the details down to the level that perhaps the team member or the management team needs. They are primarily the ones that are being kept informed because at some point they're going to perhaps be the user of the development effort, and they'll want to know, but they don't need all the details right now. And these tools, by the way, are primarily related to the waterfall method or the predictive development. So over here, the PMBOK says that the RACI chart, like we said, stands for responsible, accountable, consult, and inform. Common type of responsibility assignment matrix that uses these statuses to define the involvement of stakeholders in the project activities.
This is Erica. I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Based on that definition that you just showed,
Mm-hmm.
because I was looking at the I guess the glossary or the definitions for RACI chart and for RAM, and I want to make sure I have this clear. So RACI chart pretty much informs us of the output, what's included in a RACI chart, what's identified. I'm sorry, not what's identified. What details are in a RACI chart is like who's responsible, their accountability, who you consult, and who to inform. I guess the RAM is like, does it depict a visual of the RACI chart? I'm kind of confused of like, because it sounds like they're the same thing, but you have the chart, but then it says the RAM is a type. So I'm trying to correlate the two to get a better understanding, or even if I could see an example of, say, here's a RACI chart and this is what the RAM looks like, if that makes sense.
So I think that the RAM assignment matrix, that is just telling you who is responsible for every task, but it might not show you who also gets consulted, like stakeholders, and listing who your stakeholders are, or it might not say who is being informed because they're not folks that are like on the project team or whatever. So I see the RAM more like just when you think about last week's presentation and we were talking about the schedule, and you saw how there was, and I forget all the people's names that they used, but I remember Lewis being way overbooked. So I think there was like, let's just say there was Lewis and Ann and James. And so it showed you that Lewis was responsible for these tasks, Ann was responsible for those tasks, and James was responsible for these ones. But it didn't really tell you anything more about the other stakeholders in your project, like you as the project manager being accountable for something, or you have a set of let's call them directors that are your stakeholders that are being consulted when you have a question about whether or not you can move, like you can provide, they can provide you with more details on a requirement, or if there's some sort of a concern over a requirement, you would consult them. Does that make sense?
Yes and no, if I could be honest. Yes
Hey,
and
I
no.
know, I've said a lot.
I guess I could, I don't know, maybe I guess I look at the RACI chart as it identifying Erica is responsible for this task, and then the RAM could break down which activities I'm truly am assigned to. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe I just need to read a little bit more into it and look at the PMBOK book, but
Yeah, see, I always thought that it was like the responsibility, or the responsible team members were the only ones listed in the responsibility assignment matrix, or the RAM. And then, but the other types of stakeholders, like, you as a project manager are a stakeholder. And then you have like directors above you who might be, the ones who asked you to do the project, and you go to them for guidance on certain things, and then there's another type of stakeholder that is going to be a user of whatever your project is, but they're not going to have to worry about any of that until the end, whenever your software is fully developed and they're actually, then they get brought in.
I get it. Someone shared an example, and I'm such a visual person, and now that I've seen the RACI chart and then see the grid of the RAM, I'm able to tie the pieces together.
Okay, good.
So, okay,
thank you for whoever did that. Okay. Oh, this is so random. When I was looking at the materials, I was laughing because I said they just kind of threw in a quiz about adaptive resource planning, and we haven't even asked the first question or talked about the first bullet. So I guess this is to see what you really, this quiz is just to see what you know in advance. So, okay, which one of these do you think are true for an adaptive or agile resource planning? The first bullet, the team self-organized to distribute work. Do you think that's true or false in an adaptive?
I think that's true.
Very good. Okay, and then adaptive teams never have a leader. True or false?
False.
That's false.
Correct. Okay, and then team members are a mix of generalists and specialists.
True.
True.
Yes. And the last one, team members should be T-shaped.
True, because isn't it the same thing as the bullet above, the generalists and specialists?
Uh-huh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's check our answers here. Yay, you guys got it all right. Very good. Okay, moving on. All right, filling your resource needs. So, two things to consider when you're trying to decide what you're going to do here. Will you make or buy, and then would you borrow? So when you're trying to decide if you're going to obtain your resources externally, then you should consider some of these bullets here. So what will be the impact on cost, time, or quality for engaging external resources? Would there be an ongoing need for that specific skill set for your project? How steep is the learning curve? Are the required resources available within your organization? And would outsourcing allow the team to focus on completing the project in accordance with time, cost, and quality? So they have a suggestion here to use a make or buy analysis to make the best decision for your team. And make or buy decisions are part of a procurement strategy. So over here, the PMBOK definition for a make or buy analysis says the process of gathering and organizing data about product service requirements and analyzing data against available alternatives, including the purchase or internal manufacture of the project. Then a make or buy decision is that decision made regarding the external purchase versus the internal manufacture of a product. So now, when you're getting ready to plan your procurement strategy, you have some, over here, they have some bullets about using any prerequisite operating procedures that your company may have. You have to consider the acquisition method, contract types, and then the procurement phases. So, working with your organization's procurement department, which that we have our own, I presume everybody knows that, but in case you don't, AT&T has their own procurement department. And it's advised that you use pre-approved vendors before requesting a new vendor, that you observe purchase amount limits per signatory. Contracts valued over a certain threshold must be co-signed. And if you go do have a project where you're going to have to procure some resources, then you know, the procurement department in our company takes care of all that for you, because I've used them before. And, you know, they make sure that they give you your pre-approved vendors. They make sure that, you know, your purchasing amount limits are considered for what can be signed off on a contract and so forth. They also have defined bidding processes and templates. They require RFPs for contracts that are valued over a certain threshold. You will have to follow escalation procedures for approval of spending limits, and then pay contracts at a defined time, whether it's upon completion of work or at the end of a project, with some sort of net payment terms. Okay, so a procurement management plan is that plan that is part of your project management overall plan, and it will specify the types of contracts that you will use. It describes the process for obtaining and evaluating bids. It mandates the standardized procurement documents, and it describes how providers will be managed. And again, your organization's procurement function will be involved in developing this plan. Work with them closely and use the correct procurement documents to avoid problems. But that's good advice. Okay, so over here, PMBOK says procurement management plan is a component of the project management plan that describes how a project team will require the goods and services from outside the executing organization. And then procurement documents, according to PMBOK, are those that are used in bid and proposal activities. These can include the buyer's invitation for bid, an expression of interest, an invitation for negotiations, a request for information, a request for quotation, a request for proposal, and seller responses. A lot of different documents. And I'm going to continue to always talk about all of them, because that's what PMBOK, you know, for the test you'll need to know. But honestly, in our company, I haven't been involved where we do anything where, like, we have this expression of interest or a invitation for negotiations. Those are things that perhaps happen in a more formal type of negotiation, but I haven't seen our procurement department use those documents. Okay, so procurement documents well, the primary one is definitely the statement of work. And this is details of the work that is required. The statement of work is typically prepared by the buyer. So you, most likely as a project manager, would have to get with your procurement person and make sure that you have a solid statement of work to give them. And then from there, they take that and put in all the parts around it, if you will, like whatever our procurement department requires, in including like if we're just asking for a quote, or if we're asking request for more information, or if we are asking for a request for proposal. And the request for proposal, or it's also known as an RFP, is the buyer-issued statement of work that's required, and it has also all of the details, not only about the work itself, but what, things that are standard in our contract, if you will. Okay, so PMBOK says that, again, the statement of work is a narrative description of products, services, or results to be delivered. And a request for proposal is a type of procurement document used to request proposals from prospective sellers of products or services. In some application areas, it may have a narrower or more specific meaning. I do not know in what application that would happen, but I just know that I've seen where the procurement document that we issue is to request a proposal from the seller, and it has our statement of work in it. Okay, now in really formal procurement processes, you could have the RFPs or the request for proposal and a bidder conference. These are mostly occur in organizations where they're highly regulated industries or the government, or if the project needs specialist work and they want to find the best quality available. So they'll use an RFP, the bidder conference, and some other formal processes to ensure all prospective vendors have a clear and common understanding of the work that's being requested. And then they also work closely with the procurement department. So PMBOK says that the bidder conference is meetings with the prospective sellers prior to the preparation of a bid or proposal to ensure all prospective vendors have a clear and common understanding of the procurement. These can also be called vendor conferences, pre-bid conferences, or contractor conferences. Okay, so when you're defining your request for proposal, you want to consider what your source selection will be, the criteria for your source selection. You need to make sure that you have that considered, because at some point in time you're going to have to apply those attributes so that you pick the best response from the vendors that have provided answers. So anyways, you want to consider what is your overall or life cycle cost for this project. You need to understand the needs of your project, the technical capability, what management approach and what technical approach you're going to use for the project, the warranty from the vendor, the financial capacity of the vendor. And that kind of means, like, because you want to make sure that they are a financially safe company, right? They're not going to go out of business tomorrow or what have you, especially if you're in a method of, predictive or waterfall, and, your project might be, positioned out for at least 6 months or 12 months. You don't want them going under at the 9th month and then they can't finish the work. Also, that your vendor can take the production capacity and interest. Also look at the business size and type of business that you're considering for your contract. The performance, the past performance of the sellers, if they have any references, who's going to own the intellectual property rights, and then if there are any proprietary rights, and who has to follow those, what they are. So again, PMBOK says the source selection criteria is a set of the attributes desired by the buyer, which a seller is required to meet or exceed to be selected for the contract. Qualified vendors. These are vendors that have been pre-approved by the organization. They have a history of work with the organization, and they are often preferred because they are proven. And I don't like this last answer because their account is already set up, but they do, I guess, consider that from a procurement strategy as being preferred. Also, they point out that looking at the lessons learned repository to find historical data about vendors is a good research effort, just to make sure that, if we've used the vendor in the past, that we know how they perform based on other projects they've done for the company. Okay, now contracts. Contracts are necessary so that you can negotiate a productive relationship with your vendor. So they legalize the working agreement. They give structure to the working relationship. They further collaboration with the partner. They consider risks associated with various contract types. They deliver benefits to the buyer, and the different benefits are by type. And then it can be tailored for the partnership. So basically, when we were talking about procurement documents, and one of the first things they were talking about was, express interest. And so that kind of falls under this activity of determination of the need. And then you send out your request, and your request for information or would be something where you would level set all of your vendors or parties that are bidding on your work. And then once that happens, then the next activity is you receive a proposal from that vendor or vendors, and then from there, you use your source selection criteria to decide on which vendor you want to select, and from there you would enter into a contract with that particular vendor. Okay, according to PMBOK, the contract is a mutually binding agreement that obligates the seller to provide the specified project or service or result and obligates the buyer to pay for it. Okay, now we have three kinds of contract types. The first one are ones where the cost is, they call them cost reimbursable contracts. And they are recommending that these are used for projects with expected significant scope changes. So in this type of contract, it involves payments or cost reimbursements to the seller for all legitimate actual costs incurred for completed work, plus a fee, which will be the seller's profit. And then underneath, they have three different kinds of cost plus fee. You could have a cost plus fixed fee, and this is where you reimburse the seller for all allowable costs for performing the contract work. And then there's also a fixed fee payment calculated as a percentage of the initial estimated project costs. So in here, you can't change the fee amounts unless the project scope changes. Then you have a cost plus incentive fee, and this would be, oh, there that thing goes. Sorry. Okay, cost plus incentive fee. This is where, first of all, they get reimbursed for all their allowable costs for the contract work. And then they share costs between the buyer and the seller if the final costs are less or greater than the original estimated costs. And they base this on some kind of pre-negotiated cost-sharing formula. So and maybe the incentive fee is such that if the pre-negotiated cost sharing is $100 and 80% of it is for the buyer and 20% of it is for the seller. So if the if the seller delivers on time, then they would only have to pay like 20%. They would only have to pay 80% of the costs if they were on time. If they were under, which meant that they were behind schedule, then they would only get like 20% of the cost reimbursed. And then if they were like ahead of schedule, so they were under the costs, they would they would get reimbursed for the 80%. And then finally, we have something that's also a cost plus award fee. And this is where they get reimbursed, the vendor gets reimbursed for all their costs that are in accordance with the contract. And then the fee that they get on top of that is a subjective performance criteria that got incorporated into the contract. So there was some level of performance that gets defined in the contract, and then the fee is awarded if they meet that subjective performance criteria. So those are all the cost reimbursable contracts. Then we have the next ones, which are the fixed ones. And fixed price contracts have a fixed total price for the defined product, service, or result. And the situation you use this is when your requirements are well defined and you don't expect any significant scope changes. So again, 3 types of fixed price contracts. Your firm fixed price. This is that the price is set at the beginning and there's no change unless the scope changes. Then fixed price with an incentive fee. This gives a little bit of flexibility to allow for deviation from performance. So there are financial incentives that are tied to if the vendor achieves some agreed upon metric, like they show here, cost, schedule, or awesomeness. And then finally, they also, this sets a price ceiling so that there won't be any further costs for the seller. And then there's a fixed price with economic price adjustments. And these are, special provisions that are predefined, and they could be adjustments to allow for inflation, or if there's some sort of a cost increase for a specific material that might be needed for the project, then they would adjust the fixed price for that. And then the last type of contract is a time and materials contract. And this combines both the cost reimbursable and the fixed price contract. And you do use the time and materials when you do not have a precise scope or statement of work. Also, this is the type of contract that's used for augmenting staff, acquiring experts, or gaining external support. Okay, so now they have another entirely different list for Agile type contracts. There's some that are multi-tiered structure. These are where you create a master service agreement to capture fixed items, things like warranties and arbitration. Then you have a list of your variable items in a schedule of services so that you know what the rate is for the various items. And then you also use your statement of work to itemize dynamic items where perhaps if they go past the schedule or they overrun the budget, then there will need to be some adjustments made to that contract. They should also, these Agile contract types, emphasize value delivered so that they structure the milestone and the payment terms to be based on the value derived at the milestone. And so another way to measure is to focus on the value of feedback that's been given in the product development. You could also do your contract with fixed price increments. So you decompose the scope into smaller fixed price deliverables or user stories. And then this gives the customer a little bit more control over how they want to spend their money. And then it also will limit the vendor's financial risk. You could also have a not to exceed time and materials type contract where you limit the budget to a fixed amount and the customer adds ideas or work to the scope, then they have to remove existing ones in order to be able to stay within the budget for the fixed amount. And this, you have to monitor this work so that you don't hit an overrun. There's also the concept of a graduated time and materials contract where you connect quality and the timely delivery of the work to a financial award. So this could be where if, let's just keep it simple, the vendor charges $1,000 to deliver this work with A, B, and C in 1 month. If they finish it in 3 weeks, they get a reward. If they finish it in 5 weeks, they get less money. You could also have an early cancellation option. So this helps to enable a flexible delivery of your scope. And if the partial scope is delivered and that satisfies the contract, satisfies the customer, then the contract could be canceled for a fee. They can also have a dynamic scope option. This gives an option to vary the scope and fund innovation at specific points while limiting supplier risk. The vary scope at specific points would have to be adjusted for features and innovation. Or you could use an Agile contract type. There's one for team augmentation, so that the supplier or the vendor services are directly into the customer's organization, and you fund the team instead of funding scope. So they've come up with a lot of creative ways to do those contracts. Okay. regardless of whatever kind of contract you're doing, you should have these components in your contract. And again, if you use our procurement department, they will make sure that you have the necessary components. Description of work, which includes the deliverables and scope, or statement of work, as we talked about earlier. It includes the delivery date and the schedule information. It identifies who has authority to approve the contract. It also lays out the responsibilities of both parties. It talks about the management of the technical and business aspects. It defines the price and payment terms. There are provisions for termination. There are provisions for applicable guarantees and warranties. There's a provision for who owns the intellectual property. And there's also a component that talks about what security, confidentiality, and data privacy, how all of these need to be handled with respect to the buyer and their organization. Okay, so now we've come to the end of this section. Just checking, but do you feel like you could build a team and figure out what your project resource requirements are?
I think so.
Okay. And do you feel good about planning and managing your procurement resources? You should know how to define your resource requirements, communicate them, manage your suppliers and contractors, plan and manage your procurement strategy, and develop a delivery solution. Okay. So are we good to move on to the next topic, or does anybody need a break? Or should we keep going?
Let's keep going.
Okay. All right, so our other topic tonight is the budget. And so budget planning, the overview says that you should consider cost as well as value, and your organization and stakeholder attitudes towards budget and cost. So you create your budget in accordance with project life cycles. If you're in your predictive or waterfall method, you're going to begin with a fixed budget, and you're going to amend through your change control process. And then if you're in a hybrid or agile approach, you can add adaptability around surety. And one of the things that both types of projects should use is a burn rate. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it says here that Agile teams collaborate with stakeholder partners and finance stakeholders to suggest incremental budgeting approaches. Okay, so over here, the burn rate. This is the rate at which the project consumes financial resources representing negative cash flow. Burn rates are often used by Agile projects to budget costs for planned iterations, sprints, or increments. Okay, so for the predictive budget or the waterfall method for budget planning, they recommend creating a cost management plan, employ estimating techniques to assign costs to activities, tailor a cost-based plan, tailor a cost baseline, and this baseline is similar to what we talked about last week on a schedule baseline. You want to get to a point where you have figured out what your budget is, and then you have a version that everybody agrees to is the baseline. And from that point forward, when you start actually executing your project, you can use that baseline to monitor and measure your costs throughout the project, to see how you are managing with the actual results versus what was in the baseline. The cost baseline should also include budget contingencies to address identified risks, and it can only be changed through formal change control procedures. Then the budget at completion is the highest point on the cost baseline. This is the sum of all budgets established or the value of total planned work. Okay, so over here are the PMBOK definitions, just to be sure. Cost management plan is a component of the project management plan that describes how costs will be planned, structured, and controlled. Your cost baseline is the approved version of the time phase project budget, excludes any management reserves, and can only be changed through formal change control procedures. It's also used as the basis for comparison to actual results. And then budget at completion. This is the sum of all the budgets that have been developed to provide financial support for the work that's being performed. I guess if your project is really complex and involves a lot of groups, then you might have multiple budgets and you have to summarize all of them. But in my work, a lot of the time you get you just get the one budget, and then you have to figure out how you're going to work with that to get it equals basically your project budget and your budget at completion. So here's a visual that shows a reconciliation between funding and expenses, actual expenses. So over here, you have your cost baseline, and this is what you and your project team came up with at the beginning to say this is how much this is going to cost over time. And let's say that we get to the end of the project and it's going to cost $100,000, right? And so your funding requirements might be that let's say this might look like the end of 2024, and you'll need X amount of dollars here, and then you move over time into first quarter of 2025, and you'll need a little bit more funding, and then you move over here, and you get to third quarter of 2025, and you need another influx of funds to be able to finish out your project and so forth as time elapses. Then the dotted line down here is the actual costs of what you've been spending. And so at this point in time, it looks like for this particular diagram, Kathy should not have hit that button. Okay. Your expenditures are going up slowly over time, right? Accumulating to a number that perhaps might even dip into your management reserves because it exceeds a little bit, as you can tell over here, from what your baseline was. So, but you're still under your total that was allowed for your project budget, even though you went into the reserves a little bit.
So Kathy, I'm sorry, going back to that one, what are each of the steps? Why did it have those little steps in it? I understand the budget on the curve.
Mm-hmm.
What were the steps for?
These steps. So,
Yeah.
So sometimes, like in what I've seen happen at AT&T, like if you think that your project is gonna, this mostly happens like over 1 year versus the next. Let's say that you start your project at the end of a year, like in the fourth quarter or whatever. And so for that particular year, let's say out of the total that you have budgeted, you have $100,000 budgeted. You're only going to spend $2,000 in the first year, and then stepwise it goes up a little bit more. When you get to this point, you might need to ask for more funding, and maybe it's just provided to you at different intervals over time. In our company, there would only be 2 steps because typically a project needs to finish in 2 years. And if the project starts at the end of a year and then carries over into the next year, they want you to look at your funding year per year. So like I have a project right now going on that started in October of last year. And so the amount of funding that I need for my total project is like $2 million. But so that $2 million is sitting up, here saying this is how much I need. But in 2023, I only needed $2,000. And so they just allotted an amount to me of $2,000. And then I told them that the majority of the work was going to happen in 2024. And so therefore, the remaining $98,000 should be dropped in the 2024 budget or fund. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so again, when you're trying to develop your budget and figure out what your cost should be, they recommend starting with historical data, and hopefully you can find information in a lessons learned repository for budgets and estimates from previous similar projects, so that you'd be able to use that information to determine this budget for your project. Also, it talks about if you're in an Agile world, you could use data from your last iteration. And that's a good idea too. Then you should look for the valuable cost estimating information. And you don't want to just focus on what was successful, but you also want to know what might have been shortcomings for you to realize that your project might have something similar happen to you. So you don't want to, you want to know what were things that happened to a like project that weren't considered, so that you can consider them. And then using analogous and estimating techniques based on similar situations. Okay, so resource costs, a little bit more information here. That on the left here is what happens in a predictive world, and on the right is what happens in the Agile world. So over here on the left, you're going to match the project need to your resource attributes. That would include availability, experience, and skills and attitude. I'm surprised to see that one in there now. Create initial estimate based on average rate, and then you modify as needed. On the Agile side, you assign a blended rate. You can estimate points or effort using planning poker or an affinity diagram to find the number of user stories that can be completed based on the team's velocity. And if you remember, I think we talked about velocity last time, and that was defined as the number of story points that can be completed within a certain interval. So if the team can execute 10 story points in a 2-week period, or does the team can only complete 5 story points in the 2-week period? Then use a simple formula to estimate the cost per point by summarizing the loaded team salaries for the period and divide that by the points completed in that interval. Or you can use a formula to estimate budget that is cost per point times total point value of items to be completed plus other expenses. Okay, more on estimating costs. You need to account for all the activities that are in your work package. And this should include any direct labor, materials, equipment, facilities, services, information technology, or and then also some sort of a contingency reserve. Use a rough order of magnitude. So in the predictive or the waterfall method, typically you start off with a rough order of magnitude estimate. And this is defined as something that is plus or minus a percentage of the estimate. So you can be off by 25% under the number, all the way up to 75% over the number. Then once you get further into the project, you can get another estimate that's called the definitive estimate. And then this is where you're only off between 5% under and 10% over the estimate range. And then you can also come up with these phased estimates where, like, maybe you have an estimate for a group of activities or work packages that will cost this amount, and then you group another, like after you can deliver all that, then you'll have an estimate for the next phase and the next phase after that. Also, on the Agile side, it says, expecting the scope to change, then they recommend use lightweight estimation methods for high-level estimating. Okay. PMBOK definition. Contingency reserve is time or money allocated in the schedule or cost baseline for known risks with active response strategies. Okay, so a project budget, they recommend you use the bottom-up approach to summarize the activity costs, the work package costs, and the cost baseline. And then include contingencies to support risk management, and you put those on top. So the work cost estimates for just based upon what the activities are in the tasks in your WBS, and then once you baseline that, then you add a percentage on top for your contingency reserve, and that becomes your project budget. And then on top of that, they recommend a management reserve, and then that would be the total budget at completion. Okay. Now for the adaptive or the agile budget planning, some guidelines. Focus on short-term budgeting and metrics versus long-term. set time periods for the work and prioritize work within those time periods. And then base the cost on the resources used for that time period. I think that in some of the examples that we talked about last week, we were talking about doing things in a time-bound way for like a 2 weeks, being the time box period or the sprint or iteration. So you can estimate the budget based on current data. Plus, you could use a forecast algorithm that is based on historic data or expert guidance. You could use the top-down approach, which uses gross level estimation techniques such as planning poker or affinity grouping on feature sets. Then employ progressive elaboration and rolling wave planning methods to drill down to the task level on a just-in-time basis. And then you would just continue to do that iteratively for every iteration or sprint that you have. And then again, revise your budget when you're beginning to start the next sprint planning interval. Other budget considerations, the estimate budget based on the length of time of the project, the burn rate, use the burn rate, which includes the number of team members, a blended or actual team member rate, and the time of involvement, assumption of a full-time team involvement, and then if additional equipment or supplies are required, you add them to the estimated cost. And it says here, a product owner may control the budget depending on the team's composition. I don't know if I've been on any Agile projects where the product owner actually controlled the budget, but maybe some of you have. Okay. And
sorry,
that brings us to the end of the budget topic.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is you just mentioned the last statement. You said, I know that important piece was that the product owner may control the budget, but you said you haven't seen where a product owner controls the budget in projects that you've been on. Is that what you said?
For an Agile project, it was still the project team, the project manager that controlled the budget. It wasn't. I liken the product owner to the client. It wasn't the client that controlled the budget. It was still the project team that controlled the budget.
Okay, I'm sorry. I see the word product owner and I was thinking project sponsor.
Yeah. That's okay.
Okay,
No worries.
thank you.
Okay. So that brings us to the end of the budget discussion. And so does anybody have any, we finished in a really quick time. Is there any on the two topics, resources or budget, that you have any other questions, or everybody feeling okay about the material, this material?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of going through it, like questions and how they're the context of the questions they'll actually ask.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. And so that is the end of tonight's session then, and I can go ahead and give everybody some time back to their evening, and those of you who are on spring break can have spring break.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good luck, everybody. I hope
Thank you.
everything
Take
works
care.
out. And
Bye.
I'll still keep asking around about that, if they have the, I'm going to stop the recording. If they have the